Men, you have to pay attention the first time your wife, girlfriend tells you that they want to go to couples therapy.
I have failed as a man if you need a couples therapist to come and fix our issues. That is how I hear that. Is that a completely wrong interpretation, Alyssa? Am I just being dumb?
Correct, that's completely wrong.
Okay, you are being dumb.
I love it. I love it. How can men know if their wife or their girlfriend is really fine when she says that she's fine?
I don't know if you can ever really know.
What is a woman even looking for from you? What does she even need from you? Rather than, like, what do you want from her?
This happens all the time. You are not special. Your problems have been experienced by humanity for thousands of years. Here is the answer.
Why are women starving in their relationships? Why are men afraid of those women and their emotions and being overwhelmed by them? Why is every couple out there struggling with the question, are you really fine or are you just saying that? Today we're going to dive deep into the psychology of the female partners. And yes, I said female. I know that that's a big trigger word on the internet right now. But the women in your lives, men out there, the women in your lives who need your love, and women out there who are listening right now who need ways to explain these sensations to the men in your lives. This is the episode for you. Today we're joined by Alyssa Marie of Alyssa Marie Wellness to dissect the female psychology in relationships.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a therapist. I own a group practice. I am also a writer. Part of my job as a therapist is to help people understand why they feel the way that they feel. And if they're in any kind of distress, it's teaching them the skills to be able to navigate life in a way that feels fulfilling for them.
I love that. I love that so much. In this season of our show, Andrey and I have talked a lot about men and our mental health and our needs. And we've done quite a few episodes talking about and talking to women about how to nurture men, how to take care of them in relationships. And one thing that we're very, very excited to talk about with you is how can we reverse that a little bit? How can we take care of the women in our audience or the men who listen to us, because we do have a very large male audience as well. How can we help them understand the women in their lives and properly, responsibly care for those women in the right way? Because there's so much bad information on the internet about how to talk to women, how to control them, manage them, disrespect them, dismiss them, right? And it's horrifying. And I would love to hear your educated opinion on that so that the men in the audience at home know what we can do to help responsibly care for those women. Can you start us off with any place that you wish men knew about women and their needs?
I think it would be wonderful if men can educate themselves on this concept called the mental load. Have you guys heard of the mental load?
Absolutely.
You have?
Absolutely.
Okay.
If you can educate us on this, that'd be fantastic.
But there are so many men at home who don't have the benefit of doing this and going through these conversations. So please share with us what that is.
Absolutely. So the mental load is it's basically the thought process that goes into everything that we do. And it's been shown repeatedly that women do carry a majority of the mental load in the relationship. So these are the things that are going on behind the scenes. This is the planning, the prepping, the organizing, right? So if there's somebody that's making dinner, usually it's the woman. Not always, but it's the woman that's thinking, okay, what are the ingredients? What do we already have? What do we need? What time does the store close? How does that work based on my schedule, your schedule, and the kids' schedule? All of that we don't see that goes on up in here causes a lot of stress and just duress for the person carrying the mental load. And it would be so helpful for men to figure out what that mental load looks like, either for their sister, their mother, their partner, and figure out ways that they can intercept and help carry the mental load.
Does that look like, I'm just thinking from practical standpoints, does that look like asking more questions? The men asking questions of the women to be more curious? Does that look like men taking on those tasks? Does it look like having a sit-down conversation about that division of labor and then factoring it out a little bit differently? What's a good way of doing that for couples? Or for people?
I really appreciate, you listing all of it out. And there are some people who are going to say, I don't want you to ask me because that's more labor for me to then have to think of things and then tell you. But here's the truth. People won't know until you tell them. People can't read your mind, and they can't assume what you need unless you explicitly share it with them. And I think it's really important to do what the latter is, what you said, was to sit down and have a discussion about the division of labor. Because there are so many decisions that get made on a day-to-day basis, and then there are pre-decisions before those decisions get made. And it's important to talk about where you need the help and then to delegate that responsibility to somebody else so that you're not carrying it with you all day. So having that sit down is really important.
I've definitely heard a lot of women when the men eventually circle around and do start trying to ask questions. It's often so far so late that she's exhausted, and I have seen a lot of women get frustrated at that point and say, you are adding to my plate by even asking these questions. Me trying to educate you at this point is so exhausting. It's beyond what I have. What are some things that you might recommend that people can do to help a woman maybe right now who's in a relationship? She is exhausted and she hears you saying that she's going to have to talk to somebody and share those ideas, and she's so exhausted. What are some things maybe that the women in the audience could do to sort of revitalize themselves enough to have that conversation?
There are these couples therapists. They're married, and they created a discussion. They call it the Gottman State of the Union. And what they suggest is that couples actually carve out time, 30 minutes a week if possible. So the time is carved out and scheduled to be able to have these discussions. And the purpose for having these times carved out is so that people aren't caught off guard. And then they can prepare themselves to have these discussions. I think oftentimes people feel burnt out by these conversations when it is brought up to them. When it's brought up to them out of nowhere and they're already juggling a ton of things, and now I got to juggle your thing and I got to juggle my thing. But if it's this carved out time that we've set together mutually, then the conversation can be, we can both go into the conversation prepared and hopefully not defensive.
I love this. So it sounds like, well, just a little bit of background for you. So I was a licensed marriage and family therapist for many years, and now I coach a lot of couples. So you and I are very, very similar. We're colleagues in this. And one thing that I tell people is, your marriage probably feels exhausting because you don't have systems in place. You don't have those conversational systems in place. You haven't set a meeting time. Like you just said, you're springing these heavy conversations on your spouse, and they are exhausted, and they're more stressed out because they weren't expecting it. Now they have to allocate all those resources. So yes, to your point, if they build 30 minutes in on a Thursday, even 10 minutes in on a Thursday or a Saturday, then they can save up their energy and have those hard conversations at that time.
So I'd like to actually add one more thing too, and I really like what you mentioned about mental load and the fact that for somebody, it might be sometimes too late to sit down and preemptively discuss problems, to discuss challenges when they're already too much, when those challenges have already accumulated, and that's a major source of conflict. One thing I would like to encourage men to do is to also just keep an eye on their partner, on their wife, on their girlfriend, and to see how she is doing. Right? If you see that she is struggling, if you see that she is already running hot and she's really not able to cope, act. You do not have to wait for a conversation, nor do you have to wait for an invitation. You can simply say, you know what, hon, I need to go to bed early tonight. You look very tired. You had a very long day. I'm going to do the dishes today, and you just need to go to bed. I could see that you're busy. I could see that you're occupied. I'm going to go do the groceries. Don't wait. Don't ask. And sometimes just show a little bit of care in the sense of taking ownership and giving direction. I do know that women often have trouble asking for things which they feel they must be hanging off to their husbands or their partners in the space of domestic duties, right? And it's an uncomfortable conversation. How can men support a woman who is overwhelmed in maybe acting proactively?
So much of it is in the questions that you ask and the tone in which you're communicating with your partner. Ooh. Are you providing a safe space to be able to have these conversations? Are you providing a safe space to be able to receive feedback? Because oftentimes what happens is people ask for feedback, they get it, and then they get defensive. And then the conversation becomes circular and cyclical, and then nothing gets done, and then it becomes like a tit for tat. Well, I did this and I did this, and then it really just becomes pointless. So I think it's really important to be curious about what your partner's experience is. And then there's also the art of asking the same question in many different ways, because everyone communicates differently. How are you feeling? Is there any way that I can support you? What's your gauge on my thoughtfulness? Is there anything I can be doing more of? Is there anything I should be doing less of? Is there something that you think is just right? We want to be able to ask kind of the same thing in different questions, just so we can get to the heart of what it is that our partner needs. And then I think it's so important too, everybody communicates differently. So I've also found that some people who have a hard time having these conversations directly, maybe they shut down, or maybe they can't think of it in the moment. I also encourage certain couples to start writing to each other, because sometimes people communicate better in writing, so it's like a little journal that they keep with each other, and then they just like write back to each other back and forth. And then that can be helpful, because the person who is writing, they don't feel this pressure to come up with a response in the moment. And then the person who's reading can read it when they're also in just like a really neutral headspace to receive information. So I think it's important to pay attention to everybody's different communication styles and tailor to it.
And to that point, and I love that, to that point, a lot of men want to communicate with solutions rather than feelings, as I'm sure you've discovered through a lot of your work. And one thing that, and perfectly that you said in there, is that a lot of guys ask for feedback, then they get super defensive. And a lot of that is men are not looking at the solution angle as much as they should be. They ask a question, then they feel like they get attacked, so then they attack back. Going to your partner and asking, and offering solutions actually right up front can sometimes be helpful. That's one thing. I've been married for 15 years, and that's one thing I had to learn was I need to go to my wife and say, okay, why don't we sit down on Thursday, right? Why don't we sit down on Thursday, and you can list out some of the areas where you're feeling overwhelmed, because a lot of women do things manually, and like you said, Andre, they don't want to offload burdens to their partner. Mm-hmm. They don't want to offload burdens to them. Women are very self-sacrificing in that way, but it wears them down very often. So they manually do all this work and all this labor, and that mental load burns them. One thing I've learned myself is, in service to my wife, go to her and say, where are you feeling exhausted? Where are you feeling exhausted? And let's build systems that will take care of you. I can step in, or we can alter things. We can automate things. What can I do to assist you? And she'll think about it, and then she'll come back and she'll give me feedback on what is not working, and that her feelings are so valuable in that. And then I can say, okay, that makes sense. Those areas are not working. Let me go and build some systems, and I'll come back and we'll implement them together. And then you'll have so much more time. And that's one way that we have found to work together. Alyssa, number one, what are your thoughts on that? And number two, what are some areas maybe that women are looking for, some systems that maybe women are just exhausted and don't know, or don't have the capacity right now, the mental capacity to build a system by themselves? Where can men step in?
I like that. That's a really good one. If one thing that I'm observing in every relationship dynamic is different, but I do notice that a lot of the household responsibilities fall onto the woman. Even if they also have a full-time job, there's still this expectation to do the majority of the household system. So that's the cleaning and the cooking and the grocery shopping and things like that. And it's really important, if your systems can include outsourcing, that can be really helpful. I know that's a luxury to be able to outsource, and I want to acknowledge that. But if there is a way to outsource support so that maybe both people or the woman can get a break, that I think is really critical for the relationship to thrive, because we also want to make time for the couple to bond.
Yeah, but there's also an element of financial planning involved, right? And the element of financial planning is, look, guys, many people have to plan their finances very carefully. It is, of course, a privilege and a luxury to have so much income that you can do whatever you want with it. Usually, everybody's going to have to make some form of decisions. But what is your priority? Are you prioritizing, going on a very expensive vacation? Could some of those funds be reallocated to cleaning help? to maybe grocery deliveries, to these other things, that can give you a lot more time. It's a question of a balance of quality of life and your definition of the quality of life and the cost, and not just financial, but also the time cost. So one thing that I try to do is like, of course, we have cleaning in my house and whatnot, but like the deep cleans, the bathrooms, all that stuff. I personally like to say that let's get somebody in to do the hard stuff so that we can spend a bit more time together. Or sometimes you just have to sacrifice and say, look, I don't care if the house is a mess this week because we're all busy, we're traveling, there's, projects, there's exams, there's complications. And there has to be flexibility in these systems to allow not just for things that are kind of unpredicted, but also just for things that are systemic stresses. And then being able to adjust to them as things change is very important.
Well, and one thing that I learned with my wife and I, when I sat and asked her, where are you feeling overwhelmed? For her, it was picking up the kids' toys at night. And I said, when I stopped and thought about it, I said, well, yeah, I guess their toys are all over the place. How do they get like that? And she said, well, they'll go in the room, they'll bring out a box of toys, they'll dump them on the floor, they'll play with them, then they go get another box, they bring it out and they dump it on the floor and they play with it. And they all want to play in the living room with all of their toys every day. And at the end of the day, I have to clean them all up. And I said, let's fix this. Let's build a system. So it was, I will take charge and I'm going to start training the children differently. So the children have a rule, one set of toys at a time. When you're done with them, you put them away. If you want a second set of toys, cool. Put it away, bring it out. If you don't, I will be there and I will help you clean up that set, but I will make you do it. Not help you, but make you do it. But I will take charge of that. And when I started taking charge of that, my wife didn't have to clean at the end of the day, but she also didn't have to feel like she had to manage the kids right there in that moment. So it was a very easy swap that took maybe a week, maybe two of me really training the children to do this differently. And then they're like, okay, I'm done with this toy. Go put it away, bring out a different one. Completely changed her evenings so that she didn't have to start doing that.
There's an interesting thing that you said there is that it took a week. So a common problem that I've seen couples have is that they assume a solution must be immediate. So we talked about this, effective immediately, this problem must no longer exist. But solutions take time. The systems take time to change, especially habits take time to form. So there has to be a period where you're both training each other and you're holding each other accountable and accepting the fact that sometimes things will fail in that training period. And even after the training period, there will be exceptions. Sometimes things will happen. So allowing for the change to propagate and for people to learn is also kind of critical. How long does it take to fix a problem like that, Alyssa? Is it supposed to take a week? Is it supposed to take a month? Like, how much do you keep trying before you put up a red flag and you say, hey, this isn't working. We need a new solution. And why isn't it working?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And it depends on how big the system is that you're trying to implement. And it also depends on the behavior that you're trying to change. There's so much research with varying information about developing new behaviors. Some say it takes 21 days, while others say it takes 3 months or more. But what's most important is the persistency behind it and just the actions in every day trying to do something to better the systems and the quality of life within your family. I would say, a week is really good. A week is really, really good. And I think if we're trying to change long-standing behaviors, we want to give ourselves grace, even if it takes up to a month or more to try to change something. Because you're not just trying to change your behavior. You're also trying to help your partner change theirs, the kids. The entire system is going to get disrupted. And so it's giving yourself grace when it's taking some time. And I want to highlight another thing, actually, when we're talking about these systems and helping clear up the mental load for your wife, your partner. And it's asking yourself, like, what is the purpose of this? Like, once we figure out Instacart, right? Or once we figure out having somebody come and deep clean, that's going to take a couple hours off your plate. You guys got to stop and ask yourself, okay, and then what? What's the purpose? Because what we don't want to happen is now her plate is being filled with more stuff she has to do. So it doesn't really do anything. It's just you're clearing up this space for this space for more mental loads. Like, okay, somebody is deep cleaning and now I can go and do the 20 loads of laundry that needed to be done, right? So we want to be able to make sure that whatever system is being in place is there so it can make their life a little bit easier, and not so that they can focus on the other million things that are there.
So this brings to light an interesting conversation. It's one that is popping up all across the internet, and one that's been debated by humanity for probably the last 100, 150 years. It is it's really the question of whether or not it's best for a woman to work or to stay home. Now, of course, it depends on the person, but there's also this conversation around, hey, what is most comfortable? What are they best suited for? What is kind of the optimal way for a family to organize its life? So let's assume that there's a scenario where there is sufficient income that one, say the husband can provide, and it is not financially necessary for the woman to go to work. How does a couple navigate the complex discussion?
I think people need to do what's best for them. I don't really, those are, for me, I mean, I'm a social worker. Those are all social constructs, like, right? Those roles are all made up. We attached meaning to it, and then we all bought into it as a society, saying this is what needs to happen and this is what works. I think people need to do what's best for them, because somebody, even if there's a lot of financial wealth and somebody has the luxury to stay home, that might not be good for their mental health. That might not be satisfying, fulfilling, or even creative for them. So I do think it really depends on the individual person and what feels satisfying to them.
What's a good way for a couple to have that conversation right there? Because, I mean, that's a conversation, right? What is good for my mental health? What is good for your mental health? What's good for our family? What's good for X, Y, and Z? And because this is an emotionally charged topic.
Of course.
This is gonna set people off. People will feel put upon. People will feel pressured. What's a great way for a couple to have that talk? Because they need to. Everybody has to have that talk eventually.
But even to augment that, so exactly as you said, let's say that, yes, indeed, if these are social constructs, then they're still nonetheless very powerful constructs. It's something that we're trained and observe and are part of as a system from very, very, very young ages, right? So if we are going to say, look, let's challenge these and truly find what is right for you, no matter the influence from the outside world, how do you have that complex conversation knowing that's even more loaded?
Mm-hmm. They're just a series of questions. You know, what feels in alignment for you? What is good for your mental health? What do you need? You know, I know some people who are, they stay home because financially they can. And after a couple months, they're like, I got to get out of here. I got to go volunteer somewhere. I got to go find a part-time job. I got to go do something. And then I've also heard the opposite, where people are just like, I love this and I should have done this a long time ago. And sometimes it's an experiment between the couple, right? You don't know how you're going to feel until you're actually in it. But it's paying attention to how it influences your mood, and do you feel mentally stimulated, and what's going to make you feel happy and fulfilled at the end of the day.
Mm. That's why it's so important to have those checkpoints, right? The weekly checkpoints, because as I understand it, there is also many women for whom there are seasons in their life, and there's also, biological reasons for that. There's, just different types of cycles. Us men, we don't understand that in the same way. We just do not live that experience. Our reality is different. And I have talked to many women in my life, and, in what they want in their 20s is different from what they want in their 30s and different from what they want in their 40s, just because of that biological cycle. So as a husband, as a partner, as even maybe a friend or a relative, how do you help a woman navigate this ever-changing landscape?
Through check-ins, periodic check-ins, right? It's what might have felt right in the middle of the marriage when the kids are newborns might not feel right 5 years down the road. So it's that ongoing conversation. Does this still feel good for you? Is there anything that we need to change? Is there anything that we need to add? Or is there anything that we need to edit? So honestly, the best thing is constant communication. And I think one of the mistakes that couples make, especially when they've been together for so long, is that they feel like they know their partner. They feel like they just know. And you do know them. You do know them. We got to give credit where credit's due. But we can't read their mind. And we constantly have to navigate our relationships with curiosity, because then we'll project, like, this is what I think they're thinking based on what I know of them. But we need to continue to remain curious.
That's a big divide I see between men and women is women are constantly checking in on their partner and analyzing and like scrutinizing and trying to adapt. Whereas men largely, they take sort of a set it and forget it sort of mentality. Like, hey, we're married. You know, we've got this thing checked out. I got it. I understand this woman. I know what she needs. We're just going to move on. And he focuses into work. He focuses into other things. And he just kind of assumes she's going to stay there and stay the same. And 100% we need to be checking in. Absolutely. What are some, I don't want to say this carefully. What are some very important conversations that men often miss about what we should be asking a woman so that we don't miss something very crucial at a turning point in her life?
Oh, that's good. Gosh, am I doing a good job at making you feel wanted? Am I doing a good job at making you feel secure? How are you feeling about the way in which we communicate? And I think the wanted part is really important because especially when you've been together for so long, it's really important to still feel wanted by the person that you're with. So you want to ask questions surrounding that. Okay. So that's one or two. And then asking, I like what you asked. I really liked that question. Are there areas where you're feeling, what was it again? Sorry.
Yeah, where are you feeling overwhelmed or
Where are
stressed?
you feeling that. Where are you feeling overwhelmed or stressed? Because our tolerance for stress and overwhelm can be so high that even if we are stressed or overwhelmed, we don't think to do anything about it. We just deal with it, right? And so we want to be able to ask these questions to get people to reflect. Just because I'm used to it doesn't mean it's healthy for me.
So
Well,
when you said secure, that's really kind of jumped out at me. Did you perchance, were you perchance referring to secure attachment? Like, so the stuff that Adam talks about, the stuff that he specializes in, the ability to build secure attachment. Is this what you're saying we need to check in with the woman in our life on?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It can be referring to secure attachment, security in the relationship, security in the conversation, security in our ability to connect with one another.
You know, one thing that I really respect, guys, is the ability of people like Alyssa and Adam to actually grow their message and help people, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people online by teaching and by educating people about things that are important to them. This is exactly what we do with the Veritas Creator Academy, where we help other creators grow and spread their message and actually do good things in life while also making money, a lot of money online. And we encourage you, if you're a content creator or you want to become one, to come and check us out at veritascreative.media and learn how to become a part of the creator economy, to spread your message, do good things, make money, and also join us, hopefully at some point, on the I Wish You Knew podcast. So check us out and let's talk.
Let me ask you this, for the guys at home especially, and I think maybe I know the answer, but I would love to hear from a woman in particular, and the men at home need to hear it from a woman as well. How important is the feeling of security to women, number one? And how important is it to the female sex drive, number two?
I mean, so there's going to be varying answers for this, but I would say it's like 200% important. I would say it's 200% important because it's the basis for feeling vulnerable, right? We can't be vulnerable without feeling secure.
Love it.
What does the feeling of secure feel like? What is it supposed to feel like for a woman? And I'll give you context. So there's a public also discussion on the internet with the idea that love is supposed to feel like butterflies in your stomach and this giant adrenaline rush. And many psychologists have come out and they say that's actually false. It's actually a trauma response. It's a fear response. Love is not supposed to feel exhilarating, and it's supposed to feel different. So how is secure love supposed to feel for a woman specifically?
It's this knowing that even when there is conflict or disagreement, that person is not going to abandon you. It's this inner knowing that the relationship is going to be okay, even when it's at its lowest. And that's what secure is, right? With an insecure and an anxious relationship, it's this, oh my gosh, did I do something wrong? Are they going to leave me? Do they hate me? Are they going to be here tomorrow? Did I do something to upset them and now they're not going to treat me the same? With that security, I know that at the end of the day, there is still mutual respect there.
I love that.
And this is also a very common thing that I know you experience, Adam, in your practice all the time. This combination of anxious and avoidant partners doing the anxious and avoidant dance. It's a big coin term on the internet. Anxious avoidant dance, the anxious avoidant dynamic. And many people are starting to become aware of it. Many people are starting to try to learn how to navigate it. Many people are starting to talk about it. What's your experience so far with how many people are actually in that anxious avoidant partnership, and what do they do to get out of that partnership and actually achieve a secure relationship?
Learning how to communicate, I think, is number one. Well, number one is healing any kind of a trauma that has led to having an insecure attachment. Right? It's healing that trauma that has caused a lot of that fear. At the end of the day, all of the attachment styles want the same thing, and that is connection. And the way that they go about it really does depend on their history. But they are all striving for connection. So it's healing the trauma that has contributed to that attachment style. And then number two, it's learning how to communicate and tolerate an appropriate amount of distress.
So we do know that women primarily are the ones with anxious attachment. And we do know that men primarily are the ones with avoidant attachment. And when we know that, one reason is because when you flip the two, well, we have all kinds of derogatory names for the flip reverse. But when two people exhibit those, then we look at them and say, well, you're too much in this direction, too much in that direction. Women who have an anxious attachment style, help the men at home understand, what does that feel like for a woman, maybe in her body? What does it feel like daily in her body to have that anxious attachment style, so that he'll see her on the outside overthinking, he'll see her asking questions, but what is she feeling on the inside? Help them resonate with her.
Man, it's hard to concentrate. For some, it's hard to focus. It's hard to function because you're so preoccupied with the thought about your partner leaving you, or the thought about messing something up. It can, it's not just feeling nervous, but it can be a really debilitating experience that influences the way you perceive little things. They didn't answer my call. Did something happen? Do they hate me? It's really recognizing that it is a debilitating experience for a lot of people, and we want to take it seriously, and we want to show them tenderness versus judging it.
I love that, because so many of the men that I work with, I'll be honest with you, most of the men I work with are more avoidantly attached, and they come into me and a lot of their complaints are like, well, she's overwhelming me with her feelings. She's demanding that I take care of her feelings. I am being enslaved to her feelings. And that's often what drives them away, is they feel just enmeshed and engulfed by those sensations. But what they often don't understand is that she's not doing that out of a sense of malice, or doing it out of a sense of even just trying to harm him, or even trying to trap him. What she's often trying to do is soothe herself through a lot of those behaviors. And most of those men don't know how to properly soothe those women who are in their life. Andrey, have you ever... I know you've been married before, you have a girlfriend now, let's put those two aside, but through your dating life, you've been more avoidant at times.
100%.
You've been more avoidant. He's our resident avoidant man.
I've been a client of Adam's for the last 2 years.
We've been working on the avoidance. We're almost there. Yeah. We're getting there. We're getting there. I hug him and we make it work. Yeah, it's exactly the skin crawl. But have you ever dated an anxiously attached woman, and what was that like for you?
I have, and it's, to me, has always been a bit of an issue with boundaries, right? It's compartmentalization and boundaries have been the definitive source of issues in those relationships. And compartmentalization, meaning that especially when we're men, we do not know how to process multiple things at the same time. I tell this to my daughter all the time. I said, honey, I love you, but I can only think about one thing at a time and do it well. I can only do, the dishes and listen, or listen to you tell your story, right? It really, there's a limitation that we're working within. And when somebody is constantly trying to get you to work with their feelings, I cannot do that every single minute of my time. I'm going to have to split things up. And yes, I can designate time, but I cannot do it all the time. And there's also a question of boundaries, right? There are some feelings that are going to be, we're going to have you lead in how we're supposed to manage. I cannot manage every feeling that you have. I can be there to witness it, but it's going to be impossible for me to be responsible for your feelings. That is your boundary, and there's a boundary that I'm going to have if you choose to try to place that burden upon me. Now, I'm not sure if that is, right or wrong. I know there's right and wrong are very subjective constructs, but it's almost like, hey, you have to be an adult, and I'm willing to have a relationship with you like an adult, but I cannot be the thing that props you up, if that makes sense.
Interesting. I have my own response, but Alyssa, what are your thoughts on him so far? What are your thoughts on that response right there so far? Is that...
And don't hold back. Like this, I'm actually here so that people can learn.
Well, what I'm curious about is, as a woman, how did you just hear what he said? And I'm not trying to start a fight between you guys. You don't have to fight through the screen, but how might a woman perceive what he just said right there? Because a lot of guys at home will say something like that, right? For the guys at home listening to that, thinking, yeah, I would say that to a woman. What might a woman hear when that's said like that?
The word that popped up for me, and I can't remember the context in which it was used, was the word burden. Can you share? Do you remember the context in which you used the word burden?
I cannot take on that burden for you, was what was said, exactly. Mm-hmm. And to the extent of what you were saying, basically there was, those emotions are a burden, taking care of all of that burden, right? You did use the word burden.
That is correct, right? And many times we feel the obligation to provide as a man, not just the physical security, not just, food, safety, all the things, but for us, we bear responsibility for ensuring that our partner, our family is happy. And it is a burden if we cannot satisfy it. We see it as a personal fault of ours if we cannot make our partner, our kids, our close ones happy. We see it as a responsibility, and hence it's a burden. That means that if you are unhappy, I must go and act no matter what happens in my life. I must now come and take care of you.
So what are your thoughts on that? Because you said that jumped out at you. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's important to know where, there is something that you said, which I thought was appropriate, is you're drawing a boundary. So it's knowing where they end and you begin. That is really, really important and healthy. I also think it's important for partners, when you're dealing with a woman who has an anxious attachment style, to practice perspective taking and empathy. So if you can just imagine how overwhelming it feels for you, multiply that by, maybe 5. And that's what she's feeling in her body. And I think instead of looking for solutions, because it takes time to heal it, but maybe exploring ways that you guys can co-regulate together.
So, Andrey, maybe a conversation then, as our resident avoidant man. Would you be open to a conversation about the limits of co-regulation that you're willing to do? Like, I'm willing to do these things. This will feel a bit much to me. Would that be a reasonable conversation to have?
It's always good to have the conversation. The probability you're going to get it right is quite low. And unfortunately, many conversations with anxious women also fail the moment you open your mouth as a man. And what I mean by that is, and this is something I really wanted to jump back to, Alyssa, from the beginning of this conversation, you use the word tone. The tone with which you speak is exceptionally important if you're a man speaking to a woman who is caught up in emotions, who's feeling a lot of things. Same thing with children, right? How you say things matters almost much more than what you are saying. The words you're using carry less meaning than the tonality. Because if you sound irritated, you sound upset, you sound stressed, you sound hesitant, you sound confrontational, you can say the nicest things, but they will be taken 100% a different way. So finding the right tone is probably the biggest challenge that most men struggle with, because often the conversation will be over as it's starting.
Interesting. Alyssa, has that been your experience? Do men struggle to find the right tone or manage their tone?
I think so. And I think most people do, especially when they're in the heat of being distressed or feeling defensive. And you always want to check in with your partner. What tone are you most receptive to? How should I talk to you? Because everybody reacts different. I remember I had a personal trainer and it's like that tough love approach. And I was like, this doesn't work for me. This doesn't make me want to do anything. Actually, if anything, makes me want to quit. And so you need to be nice or tender and supportive. And then when we had that conversation, I noticed I was a lot more motivated. And so it's the same thing in relationships. The way in which we are being spoken to matters. And sometimes we have to tell people. And when you catch your partner, women, when you catch your partner talking in that tone that you like, you want to point out that I like that. Can you do that more? You want to try to point it out in the moment if you can, so that they have a reference point that they can come back to when they need it.
Now, this is a great point. So this is something when I have female coaching clients that come into me and they say, how can I be more nurturing to my partner? How can I care for him more? How can I show him that love? That's a great point that unfortunately a lot of women do miss, is being able to give that positive feedback about like that was good. I liked that. That was helpful. I think that a lot of men, they don't hear that often enough. They don't get the positive feedback. They get the negative. That tone was bad. That word was bad. I didn't like this feeling. I didn't like the bad, don't.
I always wondered, and I would love to, hear your input on this, Alyssa, too. Is it potentially because women maybe feel guilty about liking something?
Ooh.
Is this something that, a very common situation? You come to, you go on a date, you go to a restaurant, and you sit down, and you're like, hey, what do you want? And they're like, I want the tiniest, cheapest salad possible. It's like, no. If you want a burger, just get the damn burger. If you want an expensive drink, just get the damn drink. What is the hesitation there from wanting things, from liking things, from saying, yes, this is good and I want more of it?
I wonder if it derives, from both cultural norms and societal norms of not wanting to take up space.
And that's something you speak about a lot, Alyssa, right? So please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you're Filipino, right? And you talk about Filipino, specifically culture and dating. What have you noticed? Because there's a vast disparity between Western expectation for a woman and Filipino expectations. From the little that I know, I do not know much, but I also know that a lot of Filipino women have this challenge when they try to integrate both of them in their life, and they're very opposing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so within the Asian community, there is kind of this stereotype that you're supposed to be a little bit more shut down, a little bit more reserved and submissive. And I think that because of these stereotypes and a lot of the norms that different cultures have, people feel like they are being too much, or people feel like they are being judged when they step outside of those roles. So for a lot of people, it does seem a lot, they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to rock the boat. And in the process of adhering to those norms or those cultures, especially if it doesn't align with you, a lot of self-betrayal happens.
I must say, as a man, I find it very attractive when there is a friendly challenge almost coming from a woman, when she actually steps into her full self and she goes, I like this, I want this, and, in some ways almost take the lead. Intimacy is it's very great when a woman can take a step forward in intimacy. It's wonderful. Around, common interests, saying, I'll even plan a date, I'll do all these things, because we see her being her authentic full self and taking a step into the world so that she can turn into something that she enjoys. So not only do we have to be, we don't have to be the only entity trying to build a mutually enjoyable experience, that there's now a partnership where both people are trying to build something mutually enjoyable. I think many women do not realize that how much men like it when you actually step forward and become yourself. Is this an experience that you might have seen, Alyssa, too, in your practice?
Yeah, I've seen it in my practice, and I think for the woman, you want to find a man and be with a man who enjoys it when you can be yourself. Because there are men who don't want that. There are men who don't want
So let's even take this a step further, and let's say if in the experience you have with a more reserved culture, like a Filipino culture being a perfect example, what would you teach or how would you coach a woman on how to become more herself and how to step into her actual full feminine self in a relationship with such a man if she's not used to it at home, if she's not taught this as part of her culture?
To practice role playing, helping her identify what her own voice is, and then identifying, what are the fears around expressing yourself and being your authentic self. So it's through just that in vivo, okay, let's practice it. How would you say it in here? What's the worst case scenario? And then how would you handle the worst case scenario? But it's helping them really embrace their voice.
Role play. I've never heard about the use of role play in relationship coaching. Right? Actually, it's interesting because we worked together for so long, Adam, but I don't think we've actually gotten to talk about it. Probably because I was single for most of it. Mm-hmm. But what can you tell us, Alyssa? How does this role play even go? Like, can you even maybe reenact something? Like maybe between you, me, Adam, whatever. Like, what should it look like?
Yeah. So, you set the scene of, okay, I'll be the person that you're supposed to communicate with, and then you be you. And then I'll say, based on the information I have on their partner or whoever it is that they're dealing with, I'll act the way that I think they're expected to act. And then I prompt them in using their own authentic voice and communicating back. And then I'll role play the worst case scenario, which is usually rejection, abandonment, getting upset, and then seeing how they would handle it within their authentic voice. So we kind of go back and forth. It's like practicing in a mirror, except you're practicing with another person. Because that's the only way we'll build those neural networks too, is through that practice.
Mm. So what as a man can I do to, let's say, help somebody or a partner who's, let's say, just not used to that? Maybe they're feeling shy. Maybe they're feeling like a little bit caught up in their emotions. They're just not quite used to vocalizing them. Yes, of course, it's great to work with a therapist, but sometimes that's not always available nor is accessible, and maybe it's just not the right fit. What can I do to help with that type of role play?
Well, I think it's important to let them know that the door is always open for communication. Sometimes when somebody wants to communicate something, but they're more shut down, they tend to believe, okay, the moment's passed. I can't talk about it anymore. I can't say it anymore. So it's just letting them know if you're not ready now, the door is always open for us to have this conversation. And for the people that are more shut down, maybe having them write out what they want to say, right? Because people who are more shut down have a really hard time saying on the spot what they're thinking because they're just overwhelmed and they're getting twisted up in their thoughts. So having them write it down first is a really good start. And then just saying like, okay, read it to me. And then I've also heard of these techniques with couples too, where they'll sit back to back and then they'll communicate with each other. And that way they're not being influenced by the other person's like eye rolls or body language that makes them already feel defensive. So communicating with their backs to each other, I've heard, has been a really effective tool for some couples.
It takes a fair amount of discipline to not let your emotions get interfere with a conversation, right? Or interfere with a conflict. And it applies not just in relationships, but in parenting and business, in almost every interaction. And I actually do want to flag that this is something that is going to exceptionally help you if you're a man, is to learn how to work with your emotions and work with your feelings and not necessarily let them manifest, excessively. Yes, you should feel them, but, don't cause more of a problem by being excessive or maybe being unbound in the way that you're portraying your emotions. Would you guys agree with me that this is something that you should be practiced as a man, or do you think that's going to be potentially destructive or negative?
Well, I always think that it's important. Discipline is a good word. Patience is a good word. Delaying your response time. All of those, I think, can be along the same line of we want to try to make sure that whatever place we're communicating from is a place of kindness. And if we're not feeling kind in the moment, then we want to take a step back and say, I need space, because we also don't want to say anything that we can't take back.
Yeah, and it's easy to do. It's very easy to do at home behind closed doors, and when there's just the two of you, and you think that the relationship, unfortunately, is going to be there forever, and then you'll always have tomorrow. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes today is the last day, right? And if you don't act today, there will be no tomorrow for this relationship. The same thing applies to children, especially teenage children, right? Many parents run into that experience, and their teenagers will walk out on them, will do things that they will later regret. And it's very important to remember that sometimes not saying something is the right move. Now, actually, I do want to quickly jump back to this question of tonality. What type of tone is it best to use for a man when talking to somebody who is, maybe caught up in her feelings, or somebody who's feeling overwhelmed? Are there particular tones that you can teach us or explain so we can at least know where to start, maybe?
I think the way that you're both talking right now is really good. It's a really good start.
Well, thank you.
Well, we try. We've been practicing.
So right now, what we're being is curious. We're being thoughtful. We're being solution focused. We are definitely making space for each other during this conversation. We're being emotionally non-reactive. For the guys at home, I'm listing some of these things out. Any other words that you might use to describe us, Alyssa? Anything else?
I like the words that you're using. I'm gonna throw in the word tender. Tender. You want to approach it with tenderness.
There's a really good book on nonviolent communication. I think it was Marshall Rosenberg, I believe.
I believe so.
Yeah, so that's actually something I found very, very helpful. Do you work with nonviolent communication techniques? Is there anything you can tell us about that if you do, Alyssa?
You know what? I don't work with nonviolent communication techniques. I'm familiar with it as a concept in general, but it's not something that I'm formally familiar with.
Yeah. It's actually a book that Adam recommended to me when I was
made you read it.
Yeah, he made me read it, actually. Yeah, and
because otherwise he used words like burden.
Well, look, this is at least an internal conversation.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I 100% agree that this is a conversation that we're actually having with somebody who I'm trying to help.
100%.
Using the word burden is probably not the way to go.
As you have learned, yes.
Inside language, outside language. I get the distinction. But then maybe Adam, tell us a little bit more about this nonviolent communication. Why did you recommend it to me in that specific moment?
Oh, sure. Well, it's all too easy once we feel pushed upon, once we feel like our space is being invaded, to think that the other person is doing it on purpose. It's all too easy to feel like the other person is not taking us seriously. A lot of women that I work with, and Alyssa, I could definitely get your input on this. A lot of women, they start off thinking it's my fault, it's my problem, right? Women turn inward and blame the self first. And then through the years, as they are silently grappling with that, then they'll start sometimes to turn it outward and say, well, it's actually you. You are the problem.
And at that point, it's usually too late.
Well, at that point, it's terrible. So I wrote my book called Exhausted Wives, Bewildered Husbands about, the 20-year divorce, where they're together for 20 years and then he thinks everything's okay. And she says, absolutely not. I'm divorcing you right now because I can't stand to look at you even for one more second. How could you possibly have thought that things were okay? It's been terrible. I've tried to tell you for 20 years it's terrible. And then he says, oh, I can't believe you're blindsiding me like this. He goes on the internet. He becomes super red pill, right? He posts all these things about how women are so horrible. But in reality, what has happened is she has spent those 20 years turning inward and then eventually turning outward. So one important piece with nonviolent communication is being able to understand, right? This is what I'm experiencing. Talk to me more about maybe what you're experiencing first, pulling the other person's information. Help me to understand. One thing that I work with my couples as well is I say, look, before you emotionally react to the other person, stop and say, before I react, this is what I heard. Is this maybe what you meant to say?
Yeah, and we just had a fantastic conversation with John Delaney, and he said something very interesting. And he said, you have to compare the pictures in your head. Like, are you guys operating based on the same picture? Because if you are playing in different realities, how can you agree? Right? How can you actually resolve anything if there's just always a disconnect between the life you both are living? So I think there's a lot to be said there. In terms of even things like, this idea of 20-year divorce, one thing that blindsides men is that they have no ability to observe for signs. Like, they're just blind. What are some signs, Alyssa, that men can watch out for? And to know that there is actually trouble brewing, but maybe it's not being discussed, and they actually need to spring forward and act as opposed to kind of buried under the rug. but maybe like 3, 4, 5 key signs that there's a serious problem
How to
brewing.
stop pretending things are fine and start really paying attention.
Yeah, red flags in relationships.
Men, you have to pay attention the first time your wife, girlfriend tells you that they want to go to couples therapy. Listen the first time that it is said. Oftentimes I hear my clients say, I presented it to them and they say, oh, we don't need that. And then it's years later, I presented it to them again. And then they're saying like, oh, well, no, we can work on it, or I'll look somebody up. And then nothing happens and years pass and years pass. So please pay attention the first time your partner tells you that they are not happy. I think women are pretty vocal for the most part, right? So while men might be like looking for these signs, like is her sex drive low? Is she crying? The women are saying it. They're telling you, right? I think it's pretty simple. So listen the first time.
Well, it's pretty extreme if, your girlfriend or your wife comes to you and says, let's go to couples therapy. To me, my first reaction is like, man, we're far down the line. Wow, what happened? Like, what did I miss in the prior stages? Like, how do we not even get to the point where I am asked to go to couples therapy?
But even that would be great if men would ask that. Like, what signs did we miss? Like, how did we get to this point? Walk me through that. Most guys, what I've unfortunately seen is a lot of guys, when the woman comes and says like, hey, let's get some help. He's like, that like sucking feeling hits. And he's like, I got to shut this down. I have to shut this down now. Like, we are headed in a bad area.
But let's go back to what I said earlier. And I said, look, I feel a responsibility for taking care of, the woman that I'm with. And if she comes to me and she says, I interpret this, and this can be a completely wrong interpretation, but just to even, put it out, I would even interpret it subconsciously as, you have failed me to the extent that I no longer trust you to solve this problem, and I need somebody else who's a professional who can come in and solve it for you. That is like the ultimate failure. Like, I have failed as a man if you need a couples therapist to come and fix our issues. That is how I hear that. Is that a completely wrong interpretation, Alyssa? Am I just being dumb?
Correct. That's completely wrong.
Okay, you are being dumb.
I love it.
This is on record. Can we please skip that? So why is it so dumb for me to hear it that way?
I didn't say it was dumb, but I did say it was incorrect.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Fair. I self-judge on this part.
It's a story that you're telling yourself, and I think that goes back to the stigma that we have around therapy. I think that goes back to the stigma that a lot of men have around therapy and mental health and asking and seeking help. You really want to challenge, your relationship with the word failure and personalizing when your partner isn't happy, because sometimes it's not personal, and sometimes you just need an outside perspective to help you see the pieces that you're missing.
Now, if a man isn't hearing it that way and interpreting it that way, at least how would a woman maybe have meant it to be interpreted? When a woman says, hey, let's get some couples therapy the very first time, what is she saying? What are the words behind that speaking to a man?
Our relationship is really important to me, and I want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that this relationship thrives. And this is one of the solutions that I have.
I would even position it differently. It's like boys and their toys. You have a really nice car, and all of a sudden the engine light goes on. Are you really going to pop the hood and start, spinning different things and unhooking all these different, wires and hoses and whatnot? Or are you going to take it into a mechanic because you don't want to screw it up? Right? I think if we reposition from the perspective of saying exactly that, this is so important to me. I do not want to misstep, and I want to do this as quickly, as efficiently, and as harmlessly as possible is probably the better mindset. So many of your clients come in, right? And, one of the things they say, they go, well, coaching is so expensive. And we go, no. It's so much cheaper than divorce. It will save you so much time on fighting. It will give you so much happiness, and it's also going to give you so much financial savings of not having to spend money and years and years and years of, coping and drinking and fighting and all this other stuff, right? People don't actually understand the sunk cost of not going to therapy, of not taking responsibility for your mutual connection, and also the importance of professionalism in this, right? Everybody, I must say, everybody thinks they are unique. I didn't really realize until after I went through a divorce, and I was like, wow, I was like, oh, this was so weird. Nobody's ever experienced anything like this. And then I talked to Adam, and he's like, this happens all the time. You are not special. You have invented nothing. Your problems have been experienced by humanity for thousands of years. Here is the answer, and it will work in 99.9% of the cases. Like, the fact that you're nothing special, your fighting is nothing special, you've invented nothing of like absolute horror. You probably have heard some weird stuff in your relationship therapy and couples therapy and coaching sessions, and probably you're not the worst. Like, that's a comforting thought. What did you ask me when I said, when I went to Adam in my first session, I said, Adam, this is going to be a weird case. I was married to somebody who was internet famous, and, her dad was internet famous, and it was a little bit weird, and there was a lot of complications there. And I went to him and I said, this is my circumstance. What did you ask me, Adam?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I said, have you killed more than 10 people?
And I was like, what? I was like, no.
Because I had worked with so many death penalty inmates by that point in correctional systems. And I remember you telling me like, oh, this is going to be weird. This is going to be very unusual. I said, oh, have you killed 10 people? Are you a cannibal? Like, are you, what are you doing? Are you president of Antarctica? Like all these really weird things. You were like, no. And I was like, okay, well then you're well within my wheelhouse. I'm happy to help you. And that's, Alyssa, we hear it all, right? In the therapy office, you hear everything, and then everybody comes in and thinks they're going to be a weird case. Everybody comes in and thinks theirs is so unique, and there's no solutions, and there's no help, and nobody's going to be able to help them, and even you, a professional, is going to be overwhelmed, right? Do you get that with pretty much every client?
I do. Yeah, they think that they're going to overwhelm me, but it's really a projection of them feeling overwhelmed with themselves.
Correct.
So I got to ask you guys, Alyssa, if you could go first. How do you guys cope with all of the craziness? Like I hate relationship drama. I've had it. I've in it. Like, I just don't like it. It's such a drain on my life. It's such a pointless thing to experience. I really wish we could find peace and live in peace and just not bother each other and just stop it is really my ideal preference. And we can't for many different circumstances. And then I come and I show up and I dump this all on you guys. How do you guys go home and sleep? Like, what do you guys do? Is there do you like scream into a pillow? What's your coping mechanism with all of that pain?
My answer is going to be the same answer that I've given since I was in graduate school, because I get this question a lot, and I used to work in the juvenile justice system. So there's always this, how do you do it? How do you do it? My answer is, I have hope for humanity. With every single story that I hear, I really do have this deep hope that that person that has just told me the story is going to be okay. And it's my hope that keeps me sane.
I love that.
Adam, do you scream into a pillow?
I do not scream into a pillow, actually. No, I do two things. For me, everything is a system. So everything is either in place or out of place, or there's something missing. It's to your car analogy. If a couple or an individual comes into me, I look and say, what's out of place? What needs to be swapped out? What needs to be changed? What systems are missing? What skill is missing? What do they know? What do they not know? What is wrong here? Let's just fix the system. And once you fix it, everything runs so perfectly. So to me, when people come in, it's more like putting a puzzle together correctly, not dehumanizing them, but just, hey, let's get your system in line. That's it. So pain to me is a system being out of place. And then number two, how do I manage it? Well, I go home and I hug my kids and I hug my wife. And I remember that my life is not perfect, but that there is goodness in my life as well. So I can give that goodness to other people in return and help them fix their systems.
And to also remember that, I guess, the fact that humans are systems and systems are resilient. Like, it is actually in the system's interest to protect itself. People tend to forget, I find, that a relationship is a living, breathing entity. Right? It's not physical. You can't touch it. You can't put it on the shelf. But nonetheless, it is something that you have invested heavily into, and you want to protect it. And it actually wants to survive and thrive. Right, and you talk about Adam. You talk about the ideas that a relationship is like a business, it's like an entity.
Yeah, it's a third party entity between you. Sometimes I've said it's a business. Often I do, because the skills map perfectly. But it can be a tree that the both of you are nurturing and watering and caring for, that will eventually feed and shelter you. It can be a car that both of you ride around in and that you have to continuously tune up, right? That you bring into the shop, that you fix. But it is a third party entity. It's not the feelings between you.
What do you think about this business tree car idea, Alyssa? Like, is this true, that the idea that their relationship is a thing of its own, and it can actually survive, with care from both parties, but it has its own presence?
Yeah, I agree with it. I actually don't see anything wrong with that analogy or that interpretation of it. It is an entity of its own.
So how do you give that entity a voice, right? So unfortunately, in many cases, that entity is voiceless, or at least we don't pay attention to it. We target the other person, but we have a lot of trouble defining what is this entity that is the relationship. Are there certain words or certain techniques you can do so that it can speak for itself and it can repair itself?
There's this Venn diagram, and the outside circles are I, and then that one inside where it intersects is we. And it's important that you give voice to the outside circles. Like, this is what I want. This is what's best for me. But then you also go into that inside circle, and then you ask, what is best for us? What is best for the couple? So it's giving voice to all the different parts of the relationship, the individuals that make it up, and then, the relationship when you guys come together.
I love that. I will say, as a man who's been married for 15 years, as a former marriage and family therapist, as a coach, I was working with a very young couple even just recently, and I told them this. I said, look, in the relationship, the woman often, she has these feelings, this sense. Many women, not all of them, but many women are more emotional thinkers in that capacity, but they have a great depth of that awareness, that feeling, that sense. And most men, unfortunately, dismiss that as useless. They dismiss it as stupid, as she's just having feelings. But I think that women often are closest to the third-party entity. They are closest to being able to measure it, to sense it, to be aware of it. They are very caring for that tree, car, business that exists between you. And a lot of men fix their gaze outward and look out at what opportunities are there, but they aren't looking at the relationship, whereas women are very often. And those feelings that women have are enormously important and enormously helpful. Those are the lights on the dashboard of the car. Those are the warning signs, right, that are being given off. So men in relationships, learn to understand the role of a woman's feelings in the relationship as great sensors for the health of the relationship itself. Don't dismiss them as being stupid. You shouldn't feel that. This is why you're wrong, right? Here's where you're dumb. Here's where I'm smarter than you. Here's why that's not logical. Well, okay, you're having that feeling. That's a reality within our relationship. So what is that telling me about the relationship itself? How can we change that relationship or heal it in this way to give your feelings relief in that capacity and help you improve those feelings? Alyssa, what are your thoughts on that? Am I right? Am I wrong? Am I way off?
I think you are right. And I think it's important for the men to also do a little bit of deep dive and ask themselves, what were my examples of love and communication growing up? And how does that influence the way that I receive, show love, and communicate as an adult?
I love that.
There's one more question I really wanted to delve into with you guys. And this is around the concept of healthy femininity. This is something that is often pivotal to relationship conversations. Everybody talks about masculinity online, toxic masculinity, healthy masculinity, those are very popular points of discussion. I feel like we've yet to delve into what is, true femininity, what is healthy femininity, how does a woman, act in a way that is so authentic and, clear to her. What are maybe some attributes, or how does a woman get to having proper healthy femininity, if that's even a thing?
You know what? That's not within my scope, so I don't think I would be a good person to answer that question.
Okay, that's fine. I was just
Yeah.
wondering because that's such a big topic to get into.
Well, another thought, and that's fair, actually. I love when someone hits the edge of their scope and says, you know what? Nope, I love that. Because that itself is so much courage to be able to say, you know what? That's not where I'm going with that. Maybe a different angle. Maybe a different angle is for those women out there who are looking to find a part of themselves that's been missing. Maybe for those women out there, maybe it's their voice, right? Maybe it's their sense of self. Maybe it's who they are seeking to be in relationships. And maybe they're in a relationship right now and they don't know if their partner is going to embrace their care for them. They don't know if their partner is going to give them the space to be that person, and they want to be, but they're afraid to take that first step. Maybe what is a good first step that a woman could take in a relationship to see if their partner is going to give them that space to be themselves?
I think a good first step is to have a conversation with their partner and say, this is what I feel like is missing and this is what I want to do moving forward. I don't think we need to test the waters or do it incrementally and see what happens. I think we need to step into our authenticity by saying, this is what I want. And I want to hear your thoughts about it. Not, is this okay? Do you approve? But I want to hear your thoughts about it.
Not asking permission, but having a discussion.
Yeah.
So actually, here's a also a little bit of more of a specific question, but a great segue. Intimacy, right? So there's multiple, positions and viewpoints on when intimacy is appropriate in a relationship. Even, physical intimacy of various degree, and then there's the sexual act, the intercourse. And a lot of people say that you should wait on the intercourse before marriage. A lot of people say that you actually shouldn't. So obviously, every woman has a right to decide for herself. How should a woman make that decision? What conversation should she have with herself? And what are the kind of green flags for her to proceed through different stages of intimacy?
Like to be honest with herself about when she's ready, and how to really find that out for herself instead of being pressured into it by a partner or by expectations.
That's a very, very common issue, is that people have that as a challenge in front of them.
I think it's important to ask themselves, does this person feel safe to me? Is this something I want to do? Am I comfortable doing this? And how do I think I'm going to feel the next day?
Right. So not just like, do I want to do this, but maybe why I want to do this. What is my motivating factor?
What about things like, religious belief, right? So many cases, a woman is, Christian or Muslim or Jewish or any of these other religions which are a little bit more strict in terms of controlling sexuality. How does a woman balance that religious belief with her personal needs? Like, that's a complicated conversation, especially if she's taught from a young age that she's supposed to be a certain way.
Like how to find what she feels and what she desires versus what she's being told to desire.
And how to balance that. How to make that decision as an adult woman.
Well, I'm a very big advocate that we are defined by two things. One is the principles that we ourselves feel internally are true and are necessary, our own objective sense of right and wrong, even our honor code. And number two is our long-term goals, what we're looking for, what we're looking to build. And the way we define ourselves is by these two factors and weaving them into our decisions that we make. I think that unfortunately a lot of women, through the desire to be sensitive to others, maybe to not take up space, maybe to not be abandoned, a lot of women set aside their own long-term goals and their own principles so that they can be pleasing to somebody else, and then they substitute somebody else's goals and principles for their own, and then give in to whatever somebody else might want. And if they do this with one person, two people, three people, a few people in their life, they start to lose their sense of self, and then they feel that they have betrayed themselves. I think that the best thing a woman can do, personally, is to define herself as soon as possible, and then really filter for compatibility with other people who align to her principles and her long-term goals, rather than trying to just blank herself out and find somebody who will accept a blank slate. That's my thought. Now, what are your thoughts on that, Alyssa?
Oh gosh, this is such a hard question to answer in such a short period of time because it's so complex, nuanced, and it's a personal journey. It really is a personal journey, especially when you add spirituality and religion into it. It's hard to say either way, but I think it's being able to unpeel the layers of what feels right to me. And then if it is something that they're abstaining from because of religion, but they don't necessarily align with it, it's working through that guilt and shame. There's a lot of guilt and shame that is wrapped up into this conversation. At the end of the day, I do believe that people have that freedom of choice if they want to align with what their spirituality tells them, their moral code tells them, or if they want to do something that doesn't align with what they've been taught. But if they choose to not align with something that they've been taught, it's working through that guilt and shame that comes with it.
The core, I think, of this conversation is truly around guilt and shame. And this is, I think, what you're also trying to disaggregate with this idea of principles. Like, what is truly, truly authentic to me? What is truly valuable? So, as kind of a final thought to both Alyssa and Adam, what is the best way for a woman to work through feelings of guilt and shame when it comes to figuring out what she wants? Not feeling guilty to her partner, not feeling guilty to herself. How does she find that balance? Because it's so hard for women, especially with the multiple obligations and the mental loads that they experience.
There are so many ways we can answer this. So I'm just going to give the most digestible, easy. It is that self-compassion and recognizing I am doing enough, and what I am doing it's worthy, it's sufficient, it's okay. So it's the dialogue that we have with ourselves, because baked into guilt and shame is a lot of negative dialogue. And we want to challenge and rewire that through showing ourselves compassion.
Men, the women in your life have sensitive feelings. And they also have sensitive skin. If you are not taking care of your facial hair and the hair on top of your head, it's going to scratch up her skin, and it's going to leave her feeling like she does not want to be near you. Rugged Legacy grooming supplies were invented to solve this exact problem. If you want to be soft enough to enter her sphere of influence, but strong enough for her to enter your sphere of influence, use Rugged Legacy grooming supplies. I think that the biggest lie we have sold to women is that you have to go find yourself, as if you are out there somewhere. I think that we've told women you have to go find yourself, whether that's on top of a mountaintop or under a man somewhere, that you're going to find yourself out there magically. I think that women need to understand that you are yourself. You define yourself. Nobody on the planet can define a woman except for herself. She needs to define herself through her principles, through her goals, through what she truly feels, as you said, Alyssa, feels is right in herself. I think that women need to define themselves instead of finding themselves. And then once they have done that, I think that their shame will shift. They won't be ashamed for not doing what someone else says, you should do this. They will say, I am ashamed of myself because I am not true to who I am and my own sense of right and wrong. And then she can actually start fixing it. Then she can start living in a way that she is fulfilled in herself because she knows that she is doing what is right and not what somebody else has simply told her to be. That's my thought.
And I really like actually both of those perspectives, because what they do is that they help really define that beautiful entity that men, fall in love with. They really fall in love with that authenticity. And the worst thing they want to do is they don't want to lose that, but they also don't want to be the reason why the woman lost herself. So we do actually have to rely on a woman's ability to define what's right and wrong for her, to also have her voice, to speak her mind, in order for us to protect this mutual love and relationship that we're building. That's why it's actually so important to have principles conversations. So it's so important to test everything you're taught versus your authentic balance of yourself, your actual proper principles, morals, vision, and to communicate it outwards so that we as men can help you, woman, be that self and protect it and guard it and not hurt it by accident, or even by, pushing boundaries, by questioning, by probing, because we will. Like, men actually do probe and question women. We do push boundaries. We're just as, equally guilty of that as women are, right? We test because we want to know what's actually truly valuable and what is subjective and, often to change.
This is so true. Oh, this is so true, because so many men today say, oh, you can never trust a woman because they're unreasonable, and you can never tell if she'll turn on you, and you can never tell if she's gonna, X, Y, and Z. Women are never loyal. And I laugh at that in some ways, because that was the most attractive thing about my wife when I met her, before she was my wife, was she knew internally what was right and what was wrong. Mm-hmm. And there was nobody that was going to sway her from those things. Not me, not even her own emotions were going to sway her from what she knew was right and wrong. So I could fully relax into that relationship knowing that she would always do what was right. And I could always understand what that would be. And she would be very clear with me. And that was how I understood she would be a truly loving, loyal partner. And I think that men out there who demonize women in that capacity and say women won't be loyal to you, well, I think you're looking at women who haven't defined their sense of right and wrong for themselves yet.
Yeah, and in all honesty, like, most men are not any better.
True.
Like,
very
honestly,
true.
they really, like, just as much as it goes one way, I have seen men, do things they're really not supposed to. I've done things I wasn't supposed to, right? I'm not perfect. Like, I really have no right to say, oh, well, you will, do this, when I personally am aware of my own, sins and failures and other things. And really, that's why people have to understand this is a mutual game. We're actually supposed to look out for each other. We're supposed to protect each other. We're supposed to help each other guard that purity and authenticity. Like, it's not something that can really be even defined in isolation. There's a mutual responsibility in a relationship to help each other maintain that and grow that and become accustomed to a partnership, as opposed to just, outsource that problem to someone else. So, would you agree, Alyssa? Is that a correct way for me to look at it from the perspective of a woman?
I think that's accurate. I think it's accurate way to perceive it. And I think there are multiple perspectives, but the way in which you described it is pretty accurate.
I'm glad. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, guys, and it's very insightful. Alyssa, thank you very much. Honestly, we've had many different types of discussions on this podcast, and some that are very, masculine and aggressive. We're talking about the authentic, the avoidant man that drew a lot of ire online. It was very, aggressive in some ways and challenging, but this has been very gentle. It's also been very soothing and comforting and kind, and we've touched on a lot of these subjects which can only be discussed in that particular fashion. So I'm really grateful to you, Alyssa, for actually coming on and having this conversation with us in a different tone, in a different setting, so we can start touching on these subjects that are a bit more female-focused, that will help, hopefully, men at home understand that there is a different layer, a different universe that they have access to if they're willing to take part and do the work in entering that universe and showing that we're welcoming a dialogue. Would you agree, Adam?
Oh yeah, this was. I go back to Alyssa. I go back to your word, tender. This was a very. This wasn't an aggressive conversation, right? This is. I'm interested in what our listeners at home are thinking, because some of these episodes have gone so hot and so heavy and so like, and this is definitely a step into more of a woman's inner world. I think. I think that this is something that men need to hear. Is this conversation right here about what is a woman even looking for from you? What does she even need from you, rather than like, what do you want from her? I think that's a very important distinction we need to make.
Fair enough. And that's amazing. Thank you both. Alyssa, where can people find you if they want to learn from you, if they want to connect with you, if they want to interact with you? Where do they go?
My website is alyssamariewellness.com, and then my platform on Instagram is the same name, Alyssa Marie Wellness. I also own a group practice in California if anyone's interested in therapy with one of the licensed clinicians that we have.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Adam, how do people come in and talk to you? Where do they work with you, and where do they learn from you?
Sure. I'm Adam Lane Smith. You can find me on adamlanesmith.com, where I offer coaching, courses, books, a program for mentorship. I offer everything there if people are looking to build deeper relationships, especially you guys out there who are wanting help finding connection with your wife. I'm definitely here to help with that.
You do couples therapy, right, as well?
Couples coaching, yes,
couples
I do.
Coaching, yeah. Wonderful. Amazing. Well, thank you very much, guys. You can find me at Andrey Korikov. You can also check out our work at veritascreative.media for how we build content creators like Adam here and how we help people scale. And you've been listening to I Wish You Knew. Please subscribe, share, comment, hit the little ringer button below so you do not miss more content from us. And we'd love to hear the thoughts of both the men and the women on this episode about what resonated and what did not. Maybe some things that we did not answer, or maybe some things that we did answer well. We are going to be paying attention to the comments. We're going to be responding between Adam and I. And we would love to hear your thoughts about what more we can do in order to serve the more feminine aspect of the conversation. So thank you very much for listening to I Wish You Knew, and we'll see you on the next one.